and they're scared to death because what Donald Trump is saying is grow up, stand up on your own 2 feet, get the hell out of the nest and fly. I don't think there's anything legitimate about the European Union to begin with. So I don't think their concerns are legitimate because I don't think their opinions are legitimate. That is an American, because it's not healthy for America or Europe for this current relationship to continue. Can't. They can't fly. They can't stand on their own 2 feet. They're pathetic. Pathetic. NATO is a poison pill. We need to ditch NATO as soon as possible. And the sooner Europe realizes that, the better off Europe will be. I don't think there's anything legitimate about the European Union to begin with. So I don't think their concerns are legitimate because I don't think their opinions are legitimate. They're a pathetic entity that's allowed itself to be taken over by American interests, etc. And now, having sold their soul, having been America's paid whore for so many years, they're suddenly would grow moral conscience. and, oh, well, we want to be independent. You're not independent. There's nothing independent about Europe. Look what they're saying. They want a president who will continue to provide the umbrella of comfort, to keep the leash on and the collar on, to hold it tight, say heel and sit and all this, versus a president says, I don't care about you. I'm willing to go feed yourself. They don't want to feed themselves because they can't feed themselves. That's what's really this is about. This is about Europe acknowledging that they suck across the board. And they're scared to death because what Donald Trump is saying is grow up, stand up on your own 2 feet, get the hell out of the nest and fly. They can't. They can't fly. They can't stand on their own 2 feet. They're pathetic, pathetic. And that's what this is all about. This is the exposure of the pathetic reality of Europe. And it's a good thing. And I say that as somebody who likes Europe. I mean, and my family origins are European. I've lived in Europe. I've traveled in Europe extensively. I would love nothing more than Europe standing up on its own 2 feet. So when I go to France, I'm going to France, not an American colony. When I go to Germany, I'm going to Germany, not an American colony. I don't want to visit an American colony. I want to visit a nation full of people who are proud of who they are. It's a foreign country for a reason. It's not supposed to be like America. It's supposed to be their own country. It's what I love about going to Russia. When you go to Russia, you know damn well where you're at. You're in Russia. There is no mistaking it. It's Russia. For better or for worse, it's Russia. But now you go to Europe and you get America light. This European Union has watered down what it means to be a European, because being a European is a meaningless term. There's no European. What is a European? They don't exist. There's a German, there's a Frenchman, there's an Italian, there's the Dutch, there's the Austrians, there's the Poles. I know what they are, but a European, what is a European? There is no European. There is no Europe. There's a collection of nations that could come up with a loose framework, but to try and come up with a singular foreign policy, especially now that you've expanded it to the East, the East's interests are not the West's interests. Even within the West, talk about the central debates between Germany and France, and you realize there's already a division there. Brexit and all this. So, I don't care what Europe thinks. I mean, the fact is Europe has to learn to stand on its own. I say that as an American because it's not healthy for America or Europe for this current relationship to continue. It's not healthy. NATO is a poison pill. We need to ditch NATO as soon as possible. And the sooner Europe realizes that, the better off Europe will be. Because then Europe will be compelled to stand on their own 2 feet and build defensive capabilities that are realistic, not backed up by the artificiality of the perception of American military power. And once Europe understands its limitations and its capabilities, it can then figure out what a sane foreign policy will be with Russia. Understand that the policy that many Europeans have right now of being an adversary to Russia is unsustainable if Europe was called upon to stand on their own 2 feet, because they can't defeat Russia. They can only think about it with America backing them up. And America shouldn't be in that business. We shouldn't be in the business of tipping the scale on that. There's no reason for Europe and Russia to be enemies. There's every reason for Europe and Russia to be partners. But they can't be partners so long as America's in the mix. You got to pull America out, let Europe stand up and make its own realizations that collectively and individually, they need to be working with Russia, not against Russia. And that's not a threat to America. It actually helps us because that creates that creates stability. Americans need to understand just how well off we'd be if we stopped spending over $1 trillion a year on defense. We don't need to go around the world and kick hornets' nests and then complain every time we get stung and then spend all our money building, mechanisms to protect ourselves from hornets. Stop kicking a hornet's nest. You don't have to worry about it. There are things we can do. We don't have to have an economic war with China. We can use China's economic capabilities to our benefit, tap into their supply chains, bring our strengths to the table, make sure that we are essential to the Chinese economy as they are to ours. We could again go into Africa with a whole new approach. Instead of this neo-colonial approach, go in like the Chinese do. You know what the first thing China does when it goes to a foreign country? It builds a damn road. Why? Because that allows them to get in, meet, and take things out. The road is essential, the connection. What's the first thing we do? We demand that they have LGBTQ rights. See the difference? If you're, it's one thing if you're a 22-year-old kid who just graduated from college with heavy college debt and you don't have a job. Okay, living in mom's basement might be something you have to do for a year or two to get yourself going. But the Europeans are 45 years old and they're still in mommy's basement. It's time for the Europeans to get the hell out of mommy's basement. And Donald Trump will kick them out of mommy's basement. That's the positive. Europeans are afraid of this because it's sort of scary. You're being called to go out on your own and make your own decisions. You won't have mommy there to help you, but it's what has to happen for Europe to grow up. And Donald Trump is the president that can make it happen because he's not a prisoner of the legacy of NATO. He recognizes NATO for the inefficient organization that it is. It's stupid for America to spend this much money on NATO. It's just dumb. We need to get the hell out of there, unplug from that, start reducing our defense expenditures, and force Europe to stop living off of American largesse. We got Europeans who talk big now, but they talk big because they're backed by America. But imagine if they actually had to put the money up to back up their words without American support, they suddenly wouldn't be saying those things. I could sit there and articulate, if I've got a trust fund and daddy willing to foot the bill, I can talk about Lamborghinis and Bugattis all day long. But when daddy's bank account's not there and the trust fund money's not there and I got to go out and work, suddenly that Toyota Camry's looking pretty damn good. And it's time for Europe to stop talking Lamborghini and Bugatti and start talking Toyota Camry, the equivalent. They need to downsize their aspirations based upon the reality of Europe, not a Europe backed by the United States. Germany has to start looking out for German interests, and Germans' interests more closely aligned with Russia than they're currently allowed to articulate. But you're seeing that growing recognition. Look, Olaf Scholz isn't the solution to Germany. Olaf Scholz needs to be voted out. His coalition needs to be destroyed. It appears that it is. The next generation of German politicians will be the ones that will be called upon to make some of these hard decisions. Well, that implies that there was a strategy to begin with. I think the only strategy that they've had is a reactive strategy that's premised on an absurd notion of the United States will use this conflict to weaken Russia and achieve the strategic defeat of Russia. A hope and a dream. But there's nothing substantive behind that. We don't back it up with the resources. If that's truly what we wanted, we aren't giving them the resources. We should be doubling down on Ukraine, pouring in munitions and when they need it on a timely fashion, more air defense, things of that nature. If that's truly what we wanted, but we've just sort of been feeding it in there because we're trying to win on the cheap. We're praying for some sort of economic collapse in Russia that's just not happening. And the political diminishment of Vladimir Putin, which just isn't happening. He's getting stronger. Their economy is getting stronger. BRICS is making their economy more robust, more diversified, more difficult to impede through the use of sanctions. So we don't have a strategy. We don't. We have a blind hatred towards Russia that guides everything. To have a strategy, we'd actually have to have people that knew Russia intimately, who could interface with the Russians. And then you understand Russia's strengths, Russia's weaknesses. You understand areas that could be exploited or areas that should be developed, depending on what priorities you have. We should hope that the priorities are towards peaceful coexistence. But you can't peacefully coexist with that which you don't understand, that which you have used, Russophobic tendencies to promote fear that's derived from ignorance. You see, the ignorance of Russia is to the benefit of these policymakers. They don't want an informed American public about Russia. That's why they pulled my passport. That's why they don't let me travel to Russia, because I was collecting data, bringing it back, and beginning the process of informing a larger public. They don't want that. They want the public to be ignorant about Russia, and from that ignorance comes fear, and that fear gets exploited by the policymakers, who then say, we need to be stronger, we need to build this, we need to build that. But the reality is you don't need to build any of that. The best way to bring about stable relations with the Russians is actually to reach out the hand of friendship, shake the hand, sit down at the table and talk to them. They're reasonable people, and they will listen to reasonable, solutions. They're not like America that says my way or the highway. I mean, increasingly we're putting them in that situation, but the Russians have always said, we're willing to talk and we're willing to sit down, we're willing to listen. And historically, they've been willing to make compromises far more than we have. So, it's impossible for me to talk about a strategy coming, because I look at the resumes, I look at, the people that are advising. I call them Putin whisperers. They all have something in common. They went to one of these big universities where they wrote a PhD thesis on the evils of Vladimir Putin. That's it. That's all they know. Vladimir Putin's bad. They don't know anything about Russia. They're ignorant about Russia. They don't know the truth about Russia, and they don't want to know the truth about Russia. Accurate information about Russia is their enemy. That's why they suppress it. Nobody wants to send NATO troops to, let's just stop that nonsense. Nobody wants to send NATO troops to Ukraine. Nobody wants to send, if they wanted to send NATO troops to Ukraine, they'd already be there. Nobody wants, because they know what the consequences will be. Instant death. I mean, I'm just saying it straight up. We shouldn't even entertain that thought. Find me one, seriously, I'm not talking about rhetoric, one European nation right now that's saying, I'm willing to send boots to Ukraine. Name one. You can't. Because they don't exist. Nobody's willing to send boots to Ukraine. They'll send them as mercenaries, they'll send them as advisors. I'm talking about give me a whole damn armored division, because that's what it's going to take. Put an armored division on the ground in Ukraine today. Go. A, they can't do it. They don't have the resources. And B, politically, they can't do it. There's no support at home. And C, they know they'll get beat. There's no sustainability. So that is not an option. I reject it out right off the bat. It's just not an option. If it was an option, it would have already been implemented, because Ukraine's reached the tipping point, the point of no return. They've lost. Even if you sent in NATO divisions right now, they couldn't stop what's happening on the battlefield. So nobody wants to send in troops. We shouldn't even entertain that notion. It's a non-existent thing. It's just now a matter of managing the collapse of Ukraine. That's all they have. Russians are 21 kilometers away from the Dnipropetrovsk border. That means that they're 21 kilometers away from reclaiming all of Donetsk. Once they reclaim all of Donetsk, they'll get all of Zaporizhia. Then they'll turn to the business of recapturing the right bank of Kherson. If Russia is allowed to engage in military operations designed to recapture the right bank of Kherson, they're going on to Odessa, because the same military might it takes to project power over the river, get there, and sustain that presence there is the same that you need to project onto Odessa and beyond. The West doesn't want this to happen. What the West needs to do right now is pick the point where you're going to say, stop. Ukraine withdraws from all this territory in a controlled fashion. It turns over to Russia, and we bring it into this war. But to do that, you have to have the Ukrainian government willing to accept those terms. Right now, the Ukrainian government's not willing to do that. And the West, it's very difficult for the West to impose its will on Ukraine right now. Politically, it's difficult because we're going to stand with you till the end. We keep saying we don't mean that. If we did, we'd have boots on the ground. We don't mean it. What we need is and this is the tragedy of it. Again, it's like I say, we don't care about the Palestinian people. We don't care about the people of Ukraine. We don't care about them at all, because our policy right now is to let Ukraine suffer more until they reach the realization that they have no choice but to do this. I mean, how cowardly is that approach? How craven is that approach? It means we don't care about the Ukrainians, that we never have. But that's what's happening here. We're letting the Ukrainians reach the realization that it's indefensible what they're doing, and they are going to be compelled to withdraw beyond the Dnieper River, whatever. And at that point in time, we will come in and say, now it's time to sit down with the Russians, and one of the first things they'll offer the Russians is you get all that territory, because that's the only thing. And then they'll try to negotiate other things. Russia won't accept it because Russia's in the driver's seat. But again, Russia doesn't. I'm just telling you right now, Russia does not want to invade Odessa. The Russian government does not want to do that. They want this war over, but the war has to end on their terms. But they also understand that their terms can't include the invasion of Odessa, can't include the occupation of Sumy. That's a whole new phase of the war. Hundreds of thousands of more troops would have to be mobilized. The economy would, there's huge inflation, 21% inflation going on in Russia right now because their economy is overheated because of the war economy. They need to bring all this stuff under control. And they can't bring it under control if they're expanding the war. So Russia doesn't want to expand the war. Russia wants this war to end, but it has to end on Russian terms. And those Russian terms are they get all their territory, all the territories of the four oblasts that Russia absorbed through the referendums in September 2022. Then they'll dictate things about the demilitarization, denazification, things like that Ukraine will have to take. They'll negotiate the lifting of sanctions and things of that nature. But what it'll do is it'll spare Russia and Ukraine and the world because to go on to Odessa, you're talking about extending this war by a couple of years. Russia doesn't have the means to do it right now. Russia would have to mobilize all new forces. They've built a military capable of achieving the objectives that they want to achieve, but they don't have a military capable of moving on to Odessa right now. When you start talking about occupying territory, you need boots on the ground to do that occupation. As you thrust into Odessa, you have exposed flanks. You increase your flank exposure. One of the problems that the Russians ran into in the fall of 2022 is as they withdrew their forces, they thinned out the lines. They had this massive, frontage that they had to man, but they thinned out the lines. They didn't have enough manpower to man the lines, and so the Ukrainians were able to launch attacks that penetrated and compelled the Russians to withdraw, recruit new troops, mobilize troops to thicken the lines and all that stuff. Russia right now has a density right now that's impenetrable by the Ukrainians. But just look at the map. You move to Odessa, you're extending those lines. And unless you have the troops capable of manning those lines with the density necessary, you're inviting disaster, especially if you're making a lunge up there where the Ukrainians can do, pinch you off someplace. Russia doesn't want to fight that fight. That's my firm belief. The Russian government doesn't want to fight that fight. Putin doesn't want to fight that fight. The Ministry of Defense doesn't want to fight that fight. And so I think that, we're looking for the tipping point to be reached. That tipping point could be reached this winter, maybe early in spring, where Ukraine says we can't do this anymore, and the West says we got nothing left to give you, and they go to the negotiating table.
Do whatever
First
they
of all,
want.
it's not giving it to Ukraine. Ukraine has it.
Yeah.
They give away. It doesn't belong to Russia. It belongs to Ukraine. And that's a reality that people, I know that all the pro-Russian out there, it's a Russian city and all. It's a Ukrainian city. It may have a Russian heritage. It may be all this. I'm not denying that. But let's just be frank right now. It's a Ukrainian city that's become even more Ukrainian since this war has happened because many of the pro-Russian elements have been driven out, have fled, or have turned. People that might have been sympathetic to Russia maybe aren't because of the bombardment, etc. But Odessa is a Ukrainian city. It belongs to Ukraine. It's not Russia's to give. Russia doesn't get to dictate that outcome. If Russia wants to dictate the outcome of Ukraine, they have to capture it. They have to take it. And I'm telling you right now, Russia doesn't want to do that. That's just too damn expensive. Too expensive. Their concerns are, this is why Russia's talked about, 50,000 strong Ukrainian armed forces, which is really little more than a border guard and a police force. And I think there will be demilitarized zones. I think Odessa will be a demilitarized zone. The biggest Russian concern is that Odessa is used as a springboard to launch attacks against Crimea and southern Russia. That can never be allowed to happen. So I think you're going to be talking about a demilitarized zone with, some sort of observer presence there. I think you're going to see that all along the contact with the Russian border, demilitarized zones. And then whatever's left of the Ukrainian military will be this rump force that'll, be in Western Ukraine and around Kiev. But that's that. But Odessa isn't Russia's to give away. They don't own it. Ukraine does, and Russia will have to pay a very heavy price to take it. Too heavy. And it changes everything. BRICS. People need to understand Russia went into BRICS, and one of the things that it's promoting there is de-escalation of global crises. Russia can't afford to escalate. Russia has to bring this Ukrainian conflict to an end on reasonable terms. And right now they're in a position to dictate reasonable terms. But the world isn't going to sit there and applaud Russia if they say, no, we insist on Odessa, Kharkov, Sumy, Dnipropetrovsk. That all has to become part of Russia. That's a massive escalation. The world isn't going to support that. Right now, Russia has the world on its side. Russia's not going to commit, strategic suicide, geopolitical suicide by, insisting on things that represent an escalation or are considered unreasonable demands. And it is an unreasonable demand because it's a Ukrainian city right now. Russia has no inherent right to say, oh, you have to give it to us. I don't think Ukraine would ever do that. And I think the West would help Ukraine resist that. And should, to be honest. That's something that should be done. I condemn Ukraine for what they've done in the Donbass. I think they made a fatal mistake. I think there was a necessity to link Crimea with a land bridge. But Russia was willing to give up Zaporizhzhia and Kherson. That was part of the April 2022 agreement. Russia wasn't demanding those territories. But now we deal with the reality that those are Russian territories. And I support Russia 100% on that. But if Russia said, no, you have to give us Odessa, no, they don't. No, they don't. And if Russia wants to turn itself into a nation that actually starts to walk and talk the talk of being the aggressive state that Europe is afraid of, demanding that Odessa be turned over, puts Russia in that category. I don't see Vladimir Putin being that leader. He hasn't said anything that puts him in that category. He is a rational person. He believes in the rule of international law. And so I don't see, I just don't see that playing out. Not at this stage. I mean, if BRICS wasn't in the equation and Russia didn't have that kind of pressure placed on, its geopolitical future for de-escalation, maybe Russia would succumb to some sort of, nationalist, security-oriented approach. But I don't see the Russian leadership saying Odessa has to belong to us, because that's an escalation, one that the world won't support, and all it does is lengthen this conflict, and Russia does not want this conflict to go on. They're winning right now, and they have positioned themselves to be able to continue this conflict, but this can't go on forever. It's not good for the Russian economy. It's not good for the world. And, so I'm a firm believer that we're going to see some sort of negotiated peace that is to the benefit of Russia, but it'll be reasonable. It's not going to be unreasonable.